Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Hobo Thinga podcast. My name is Crystal Cedino, and I am the Training and Development Manager for the Native Learning Center. Really thrilled that all of you are tuning in for another episode, whether it's coming from our YouTube channel or our actual podcasting platform. Thank you, thank you, thank you. We're super appreciative of all of you. Today, we're actually going to be discussing data and planning with a few returning guests and one new one. And I'm very excited to introduce everyone again. So with that, I have Dr. Cynthia Nett, a research associate professor at KSU and a data and mapping maven, who is also a Google Earth Outreach Network trainer. I love that introduction. I know you cringe, Cynthia, but I love it. I absolutely love it. And then with us as well, we have Eugene Goldfarb, an adjunct professor at University of Illinois, Chicago, who retired after 30 years with HUD and has been a longtime NLC instructor. And then we have Mark Junker, Tribal Response Coordinator for the Sac and Fox Nation of Missouri in Kansas and Nebraska, who's also active in many national tribal environmental initiatives. Go ahead and wave to the camera, Mark. There he is. And last but very not least, we have Victoria Flowers, who's the Senior Environmental Specialist with Oneida Engineering Services, owned by the Oneida Nation. Go ahead and wave, Victoria. Thank you. Awesome. All right. So since Victoria is a new guest on our podcasting platform, I wanted to give her an opportunity to introduce herself and tell the audience a little bit about herself. So with that, go ahead and take it away, Victoria.
Hey, thanks, Crystal. I really appreciate that. Mark, Cynthia, and Eugene, I am not worthy to be on the same podcast as you, but with that, I'm really grateful to be here. I've worked in the environmental field for nearly 40 years. I can't believe I'm there. And I've worked with tribes around the country. I'm on several national work groups and do a lot with data, environmental program development, metrics measuring, and those types of things. So I'm really excited to have this conversation and get everybody as excited about data and data mining as I am. So with that, take her away, Crystal.
Thank you so much. All right, I am excited and very intrigued to discuss today's episode because we have talked about data before, specifically with Dr. Cynthia Nett. Do you ever get tired of hearing that, Dr. Cynthia Nett? I know I would. I think that's amazing. But with that, let's give a little bit of context to our listeners and viewers on what we specifically mean regarding data and planning. So anyone who wants to jump in.
Well, last time, for those who heard the episode, we got kind of nerdy and we were talking more specifically about what data are and the fact that tribal knowledge is part of our data sets and a very important, probably the most important part, that elder knowledge as well as scientific measurements are used for looking at decision making, especially for brownfields. And people who have heard our previous episodes will recall that brownfields, we call them stuck properties. Those are places where either there is contamination or there's a perception of contamination or there's something about them that is preventing them from being part of the community's normal planning and development. And so our specialty at K-State Tribal Tab is looking at these stuck properties, getting the community engaged, and looking at evidence-based decision making. And we're technical assistants for all of those things. But this week, we were hoping to bring Vicki into the conversation because she has a lot of on-the-ground experience and is very, very experienced at how to bring in the community knowledge and the tribal knowledge into the hard science and how you do that balance and what the appropriate balance should be. So we're really excited to have Vicki.
Yeah, and I like to say that in today's modern world, there's a tendency to think, oh, we do things differently. We have all this data, but we've always had data. It's just now it's easier to get data. It's easier to show it. It's easier to present it. It's easier to verify it. And the stories that we tell to try and move our group along to make decisions is a way of presenting data in a story that people can understand. But we could do so much more today than we used to be able to do, and anyone could do it.
Yeah, and that's great, Eugene. And when we talk about community knowledge, when we talk about on the ground, and whether it be indigenous knowledge or community knowledge, I think of the phenology calendar, right? We're entering into spring. We're starting to see things change, right? We see the bird song starting to change. That's a data point, right? We start to see the emergence of the little bugs, although where I'm at right now, currently everything is under 6 feet of glaciers. But we start to see that, and those are indicators of the health of the environment, right? And so we can bring those in. If suddenly we're not seeing a certain little bug that annoys us, why is that happening, right? The earth is telling us, nature is telling us, and we have to listen to that, and we have to take that into our collective knowledge to inform our decision making and to look for the problem. Why is that bug not showing up? Why are the bird songs changing? Why are they suddenly building nests with trash rather than dry grass? So those are indicators that we can use in our data set to help make us make good informed decisions that's responsive to the rhythm and the flow of life.
Definitely. And, I've been out in Indian country, and I think one of the main points or things that I've definitely picked up on has to be how natives take care of the land. They really do care about the land. So I can definitely see why something like this would be so important to, have in your back pocket to try and understand and see what's going on with your current surroundings. So, all right, I'm excited to jump into this. So let's go ahead and jump into our first question, which is, what are the impediments to tribes collecting data for decision making about housing, brownfields, cultural preservation, and economic development? Anyone?
Yeah, I think the tribes are at a little bit of a disadvantage because the federal government is so siloed. Their data sources are coming from a lot of different places, and those sources don't necessarily always communicate with each other. And when we talk about data, just the fact that people are tuning into this shows that they have a level of excitement that really is a little bit above average, because when I mention the word data, I can see a lot of people around me just shut down. I'm not necessarily the life of the party when I start talking about data. And so to be able to bring that kind of level of excitement that we get, we have to have specific data points. And that usually brings us to a tipping point where that data becomes actionable. It might be pointing out a health risk or a profit margin or just some community need that the data can indicate to get people moving and as excited as we are.
You mean numbers? Numbers don't get you rowdy? Numbers don't get people rowdy? Go ahead, Victoria.
No, thanks. I think one of the other impediments and challenges, right, is an inherent distrust of the federal government that many Native communities might experience for a variety of reasons, right? We, we talk about, historical trauma and trauma informed decision making, right? And why do we talk like that? We talk like that because people people learned from very negative experiences that when they shared something, it was often taken away from them. Think of, why do we have the Native American Graves Repatriation Act? We have that because tribes shared information with people about where their loved ones were buried, where their ceremonies took place. So I think that's one of the impediments. And to Mark's point, the siloed nature of the federal government, right? That is so daunting and overwhelming because they have different data sets that don't talk to one another. And to that end, right, even historical sites and archaeological sites, when those are cataloged and entered into a database, they aren't communicating with anything. So there has to be boots on the ground and local offices within tribes that can help the decision makers guide where they're going to do things and how they're going to do things. I'm currently working with a group right now that has some ancestral lands. It's a burial site and it's within a big city, but they don't own the property, but the entity that owns the property did some redevelopment and started dumping all their dirt piles on top of this sacred site. And they've been working for years to try to correct this. The tribe will never own the site, but they want to be able to use it for their ceremonial purposes. And it's desecration of a grave site. And, that wasn't well articulated to the entity that owned the location and decided to dump dirt on it. I don't know if I got off track or not, but those are data points.
I'd also like to add that Mark brought up a very important point that the silos and each federal agency only cares about what they're doing, not very maybe tangentially with the other, but it's compounded by at the tribal level, the tribal organizations are set up to mirror and to get funding and to work with the programs in the Fed, so they become siloed. Like we have a tribal housing authority, a tribally designated housing entity. Do they talk to the tribal response program? Do they even know that they exist, that they could help them maybe if there are contaminated units, or help them find the right site when they're developing new units? And it just goes on and on. And one other thought related to that, it's like in America, we Western world, we sort of believe the free market economy, that it's okay for people to just think about themselves because the market is going to combine it all together and work things out. But it doesn't always. The market works okay for lots of things, but not for other things like health and safety and public cost and all that. And it's good for us to think of like a holographic universe. It means something different today, but my daughter read this book years ago that if you take a hologram and you cut just a little piece, you could see the whole hologram in that little piece. It contains everything. And everything we do, even though we think we're only doing something relating to storing earth from doing a site, we're also affecting somebody's religion. We're affecting sites. Everything affects everything else.
Eugene, thanks for bringing that up. That actually relates to an issue Mark and I really struggle with, right? So Mark and I work with underground storage tanks. And one of the challenges we have is that as environmental professionals who care about and it's not that people don't care, right? But our job is to ensure the safe operation of a fuel system that contains a hazardous substance that would cause great harm to the environment. And one of the challenges we have is you've got your gas station on the other side, right? They're interested in selling chips, soda, and cigarettes. The gas, they don't make any money on the gas. It's the chips, soda, and cigarettes. The tribal leadership expects that gas station to make money for the tribe so that it can exist. And oftentimes the stuff that Mark and I are concerned with regulations, ensuring that the equipment works properly, that there's testing being done at a regular interval, that the walkthroughs are being conducted. All those activities take away from the bottom line of that retail entity. So, there's not that good knowledge transfer across these artificial boundaries. So then leadership isn't aware of how the things that Mark and I do affect the bottom line, because the gas station, it's about chips, soda, and cigarettes. So it's how do we take that data and that knowledge that Mark and I have about what the impacts to the environment are if a release occurs from this fueling system and transfer that up the food chain, right? But that speaks to the point of the free market economy, right? Give me money, give me money. You know, don't tell me what it costs, just give me money. And how sometimes that focus on the dollar, you know, kind of overshadows protection of the environment.
I can definitely see that because, you know, to all everyone's point, I mean, in this day and age, so I'm 31, my generation and my sister's generations, they're younger than I am. I notice with them that it is very like me, how is this going to, you know, affect me and whatnot, but I'm very much like bigger picture. Like let's look at how this is going to affect this and so on and so forth. So definitely, thank you for that. Now with that being said, how can these impediments and challenges be managed? Because it's one thing to talk about the problem, but I think we need to discuss more about solutions. So how can they be managed?
It's a problem that's been around for quite a while, and it's recognized every 5 or 6 years. It seems like a new initiative that's got holistic in the title somewhere pops up, and so people want to take on the problem with a holistic type of attitude, and so we've got liaisons that are thrown into the mix, and for a little while it seems like there is some communication going, and then those people wind up getting siloed as well. And so one of the things that we found is really kind of energizing is, you know, bringing people together with a lands forum like the tribes do. I think the next one's going to be up in Milwaukee this summer, and giving people an opportunity to see the kind of work that is going on and be able to communicate and you know, imagine some of the projects that could be done by working together, sharing data, sharing vision, and you know, looking at it in a holistic manner, and doing that as a routine rather than something that is just fashionable.
And you know, you mentioned that you're 31. One of the things that I love, you know, being in my 60s, one of the things I love about the younger generations is this whole idea that it's much easier for you. I'm stereotyping, but it's much easier for the younger people, partially because of their education, partially because this fantastic worldview is developing, to see things as connected, you know, to see the connections and to see that something doesn't have to be one thing, doesn't have to be only one thing. But in my education, when I was in college in the 70s, people specialized very narrowly. So you know, you were, you know, you studied the air, or you studied the water, or you studied the soil. And if you studied the water, you studied the fresh water, or you studied the salt water. You didn't go between the different fields. And when the environmental laws were written in the 70s, it reflects my education, which was the siloed education, where we have the Clean Air Act, we have the Clean Water Act, we have RCRA, you know, all these different acts that treat the world as parts, as if you could look at air without looking at water. You know, when we look at mercury contamination in water, it's coming from the air. These are all interconnected. And I think that one of the solutions we have is just having the younger people growing into professionals who think that it's ridiculous to divide the world up into these little categories. But the laws were written by my generation, and the laws were written to reflect this silo. And that's one of the things we need to start breaking down.
Oh, okay. But as someone with 30 years in the federal bureaucracy, I got to point out the federal government is not monolithic. It's not like there's lots of things happening at once. And one of the things they did in 1970 is they passed the National Environmental Policy Act, which means that anytime the federal government spends money, does something, it has to at least make an attempt to listen to everybody and to get everything. So it's sort of like Cynthia says, it goes against the grain of these experts who are running a program and they want to get it done, but they got to do this NEPA environmental review, and they have to. And if anyone writes a comment, if anyone says, hey, this is a problem, there has to be something in the administrative record saying that they looked at it and they dealt with it in some way. So it's not a total solution, but it's moving in the right direction. And there are opportunities to tell the decision makers, hey, wait a second, look at what you're doing to us.
I find this, oh, go ahead. I just find it so fascinating.
I think to that point, Eugene, right? We went through a period of time in the NEPA world, right, where they were trying to streamline it and take out certain parts of it and not look at cumulative impacts, right? That's what we need to look at is immediate and cumulative impacts. And the fact that now they're trying to re-energize the NEPA process in looking at climate change, right? How is this action going to be affected by climate change? How is this going to affect climate change? What's about environmental justice? What about the socioeconomic impacts of an action? I think there's some good movement going forward, but unfortunately, right, because of the way that NEPA is applied in the federal government, it makes it really confusing for the average person to participate in it. Each federal agency has its own NEPA process and its own set of categorical exclusions. And, this is the work that I do every single solitary day, and I get confused by it. So it's really, really difficult for the average person to fully engage in that entire process. So, right, so you've got the federal government that's got, these different agencies. Each one has its own NEPA process. Then you layer on top of that the fact that states often have their own NEPA process for some of the permits that they have to issue. I've been participating in a review of a pipeline project. And, I'm on these public meetings and there's hundreds of people trying to speak on these public meetings. And after 10 hours of public testimony, you kind of get a little burned out. But it's really, really hard. And I almost think that in today's day and age, the way to get that data in front of people so that they can process and think about the effects and cumulative impacts of an action is they should have to do a public service announcement. They should have to, put it in a video format so that, they should tell the story with it, right? We've got all these fantastic tools for showing how does a pipeline go in? What does a pipeline do? Where do pipelines live? What are, those, again, right? Getting back to the data, right? What's the data points they're using to tell their story? So I think if we can, I don't know, it's not up to us to it, but I think it would be a great idea.
Definitely. Go ahead, Eugene.
I was just right now I'm thinking that some TikTok influencers have to start doing pipeline videos.
The NEPA TikTok channel.
So it's funny, like we kind of joke about it and all that, right? But one thing during the pandemic, so 2 years ago, right? It started 2 years ago. Time is flying, y'all. But one thing that I saw that came out of it, I guess, if you want to look for silver linings or a positive, kind of outcome, was that with social media, TikTok and everything, there was a lot of creators that definitely came out of it. And I know it sounds a little funny and, people might be like, well, then who's going to watch that? But I think there is something where, Cynthia is mentioning that combination of having the youth understand or try and understand and look at things from a broader standpoint and not so siloed and one way where, to inform people what's one of the best ways through these social media platforms. So like I said, it sounds kind of funny, but honestly, like doing stuff like that, incorporating modern day, technology like TikTok, Instagram, and so on and so forth, and trying to introduce, the data and any other information that is important, because numbers don't lie. That's the one thing I love about, data and all of that. But, and Cora mentions it all the time, our other host. She says, whenever you're trying to prove a point or anything and you have numbers and you have data, it's always like, nope, like, look, it's right here. This is, these are hardcore, numbers here, and this is what I'm showing you. And then people tend to be a little bit more like, okay, I can see.
While
Go.
while we're talking about the democratization of data, I think I should point out that it's a rapidly changing world and things are changing, and one of the great things today is anyone could get most of this data off of the internet. Anyone can manipulate it, like Google Earth, which Cynthia is an expert in. You used to like need a PhD to do the stuff that you do in Google
A
Earth, or to buy
security
that.
clearance.
Yeah,
You used to need a
clearance.
security clearance to get satellite imagery when I was in college.
Yeah, using the data, accessing and knowing how to do it. Thousands of dollars worth of software now, it's free. So that's number one. Number two, my colleagues at TAB are maybe not as familiar, but HUD is moving more than other federal agencies in this direction. They have this HERO system, HUD Environmental Review Online System, where now every time an environmental review, and this is not an Indian country, I don't want tribes getting excited, oh, we're not doing it in HEROES. Like it's not going to be rolled out anytime soon in Indian country, but tribes can use this. But it means that not only could you get your information, but you post all your reviews, and anyone in the public could go on and say, give me all the reviews that were done in the last 3 months in the state of New York. Grantees, and oh yeah, there's my tribe. Let me pull that out and let me look at it. And whereas in the past, maybe there was a public notice saying, oh, you could come into the office to look. Nobody ever did that. Nobody ever came in. But now it's really easy to look at this stuff. And as we move to the future, things are going to change for good and
Well,
bad.
EPA EnviroFacts is another example. You can actually get the permit data and figure out whether or not a permitted site is out of compliance, whether there's violations. And it only takes like 3 clicks to get there. So this is, much more transparency.
Right. Except that they're not terribly user friendly, right? You have to have some kind of knowledge about what you're looking for. And, one of the things I hope, because EPA is revamping all its data. I'm on a work group where they're trying to bring the data in a more consumable fashion, right? So that we can actually get to it. But one of the things I think, every agency that interacts with the people, whether it be state or federal or what have you, county, they got to make it stupid proof, right? They should be having fifth graders see if they can find the information, because it not everybody thinks in boxes and lines, right? Because that's right, data is linear, it's boxes and lines, you go from one to the other. And those are the challenges that have to be overcome. It's interesting to me, right? I have coworkers and colleagues who say, I can't navigate that system, I can't get on there. But man, they know how to do TikTok videos. They know how to get on Facebook. They know how to do Instagram. So, maybe there's something, maybe they should hire the engineers that develop those platforms, right? In order to actually help us find data.
I wouldn't be surprised if something like that were to happen. I think it's a matter of thinking outside of the box and seeing what's available today. But How cool would that be? Someone who worked on like the TikTok and was an engineer for that, and now all of a sudden they're working, in environmental and trying to figure out programming to make it more accessible and user friendly. You never know. We're saying this now. Watch. In a matter of years, it's something that's going to happen. I'm sure. I'm sure of it. But with that, so let's go ahead and jump into our next question. So if we were looking to address some of these issues, what are the steps that anyone would take?
Hey, I'll start off. I hate a vacuum, but I'll say, like, anytime you have an opinion or a point of view, you think there's an issue, it means there's some data to support it. I mean, you trust your gut. Hey, I know there's something wrong. Or as Victoria was saying, you look at the birds and the insects, and you see something's not right, and then you either try and quantify it. You look if there's any data out there. And then if there are data gaps, maybe you have to generate some data.
Right, right. Yeah, so, I think the analogy I like to use is reverse engineer, right? What's the outcome you're trying to get to with something, with an action, whatever that action is, right? Reverse engineer. What are the pieces of information you need to make this decision happen, the desired outcome? What do you need? So then that way you can start to map out your data mining efforts so that you know how to look for pieces of information. I guess a good example that I like to share about that, there was a tribe that lived alongside of a lake that had an electrical power plant on it, and they raised and lowered the lake levels by letting water through the hydroelectric plant. Um, and one of the things that was really troubling the tribe was that their fish population, the walleye that they depended on for some of their ceremonies and for their sustenance lifestyle, their numbers were decreasing, right? And the other thing that was happening is their rice beds were decreasing. They used to have 100 acres of rice, and that went down to less than 10 acres of rice. You know, concurrent with this lake being developed, right, and being managed and manipulated through the hydroelectric dam, it invited a lot of development along the lakeside, right? People found recreation opportunities. They wanted to live there. Well, the tribe was looking for answers. Why was this happening? Why are the fish dying? Why, is the rice going down? There's the obvious answer that, maybe the development alongside of the lake was causing some changes to the lake, that the raising and lowering of the lake levels was causing problems. Well, the tribe received some funding for 106 Clean Water Act funding and 319 for non-point pollution. Well, with that money, they were able to start gathering data points. They were gathering data points about the turbidity of the water, the nutrient load, the microinvertebrates, the macroinvertebrates, what was going on. So they were collecting all this information. And while they were collecting that information, what they realized is that by the lake level raising and lowering, it was changing the dynamic of the food chain. So the fish were dying, right? And because the 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 surrounding area had a lot of runoff coming on, it was making the water more murky. It was reducing the amount of dissolved oxygen in there. Native species were being replaced by carp, which just absolutely thrive in low level oxygen areas. And the thing about carp, right? So carp are just messy fish. I mean, they're fish, but they're messy fish. All fish are messy. They swim in their own pool. But so what was happening is that the walleye would spawn in the rice beds, right? But the walleye would come and they'd stir up the dirt, right? The mud. They run around in the mud. So what they were doing is they were disturbing the nurseries of the walleye. Also, what they were doing is they were disturbing the seedlings of the rice. The carp were disturbing the rice beds, correct. And so with the raising and lowering of the water for the hydroelectric dam, they were raising and lowering it to feed an energy demand. That energy demand coincided with when the rice was at a certain stage called the floating leaf stage. At the floating leaf stage, the rice actually start to set their rice heads. If the water is raised above that floating leaf stage, the rice can't set its seed heads, subsequently reducing the amount of rice that could be harvested, as well as when they harvest the rice in the traditional way, when they harvest it, some of the seeds invariably fall to the bottom of the lake bed and repopulate the rice bed. So there was all these things happening. So from the collection of data, they were able to solve all these different problems, right? And the result was that through their 319 plan, they started to protect the shoreline and reduce runoff. They worked with the Energy Commission to prevent the raising and lowering of the water levels during that sensitive time of the rice beds setting their seed heads. So all that was made possible by the collection of data. The other thing, too, what happened is the indigenous coming back and doing their traditional things. They started gathering again. So there was a socioeconomic impact. There's a health impact because they started to eat healthier. And I don't know if they ever gathered data or metrics on the change in obesity or in diabetes or heart disease as a result of that, but I'm sure the data exists. It would be interesting to find out if that was also the end result. Sorry, I didn't mean to carry on.
No, that's a very important point. It's not just an Indian country; it's all across the country. That after World War II, when we were doing a lot of urban renewal in cities, we were building the suburbs, like the highway department. They only cared about building highways. They didn't care if they were cutting off neighborhoods and everything. And there was a revolt in this country. I think Jane Jacobs was a famous writer about that time. And some talk about Jane Jacobs versus Robert Moses, where they said you got to think about the community. And that's when we started saying there have to be public meetings. You have to get stakeholders involved in decisions. We screwed up a lot. The way to get it right is to get people involved and have them bring their own data, have them bring their own interpretations, and have everybody talk about the interplay.
I find it so interesting how, things like that, Eugene, like highways interrupting communities starts, sort of like a domino effect of like, no, you got to do this now, I think that's so important though, because we do have to, again, it just circles back to what we were saying earlier. Like, you have to think of the bigger picture and you have to care about what's going on around you and how things affect other things. So, wow.
And
I
then
love
there
it.
has to be a process to gather this information, to get people involved, to say you have a voice, and to say we want to listen to you. But if you don't talk up, nobody's going to hear you. Nobody's going to read your mind.
Definitely, definitely. All right, so I know there's been some mention of tools and whatnot, but let's get specific. What tools are most helpful in our discussion? What we're talking about?
Well, I think
Vicky?
one of the tools that is pretty new, I think, in the grand scheme of things, is the story maps that are coming out, where you're able to take really good data, plot it on a map, and present it in a form that's really engaging and interactive and allows people to focus on specific facets of the data that are pertinent to the work that they're doing. And the story maps are fantastic. The problem that I have with them right now is that it is a little bit specialized in as far as being able to produce something that's palatable for a wide audience. I think PowerPoints can be really effective as well. anything that's got a little bit of multimedia to it that allows you to, show raw numbers. Some people really like those. Some people really like the the pictures and the videos, and others, want to hear someone speak. It always seems a little bit more powerful when you, have someone with a great voice that can tell the story like Vicky does with the rice beds, because it's a story that's engaging and it has a great outcome, but it's all database.
We live in an age where we're seeing this incredible blossoming of the use of geospatial data, which is basically what you can map, right? So the platforms that we can use right now are very accessible. If we talk about an Esri story map, which is a wonderful tool, but it takes some technical skills. But if we look at Google Earth Web and some of those tools, the learning curve is much easier. But all of those are a way of geospatial data telling, but also including videos. So you can have a map with a voice. You can have a map that really tells a story because you can have those voices embedded within the places on the map. And this is new technology that is making such a powerful impact.
And could I point out that Cynthia has a great website, cynthianet.org, and she runs these workshops and she puts them all up on her website. And if you're at all interested in this, just, go to your computer, look that up and see some of the maps on the workshop she's done and see what's possible.
I'm telling you, TikTok is going to be part of this eventually. Y'all laugh, but I swear, we're talking about videos and all of that. It's where we're going. How cool would that be, though? I think that would be so neat. I mean, I love seeing stuff like that. Any video that I see of like nature and people talking about, how things are affecting or whatever it may be, I'm always like, ooh, what's this? And then I continue to watch and see if there's anything else that's out there for me to look at. So telling you.
We're doing a workshop Thursday, and I think that there's got to be a TikTok component. Maybe as the last thing we do is make a TikTok mapping climate change.
If it results in a video of you dancing and singing, Mark, I want to see it.
You got it, Eugene. I'll tag you.
Awesome. All right. Well, that we talked about tools. So what if you have these different maps and data tables, how do you pull them together into a larger whole?
Well, I think I'll start, but I think the way a lot of us work is they're advocates, and often you have like different advocates pushing different data sets, pushing concerns, trying to do something, and then whatever governing body or whatever staff is helping out, they have to try and sort it out or develop new data. But it's it's definitely when I used to do this when I worked at HUD and we were working on projects. You look for issues. One way of finding issue is it doesn't meet a standard, but another way is people yelling and screaming about something. And then you better look at it. You better try and get it right.
Yeah, it is kind of the $64,000 question, to make sure that the data is being collected in the first place. Is it something that is ultimately going to be actionable? And that's where you do need the different voices to come together to see what is the actual goal.
Yeah, and I think we're going to deal with this on a future podcast. We're talking about like doing your brownfield inventory. How do you determine which properties there are, which ones to look at first, to do second? And what we found when we do stuff like that is different people have different perspectives. Different things are more important to them than others. And you have to come up with some sort of way. Politics is not a dirty word. Politics is a way of getting the community together to say, how will we weigh these things? We know there's a contamination problem, that we know it's affecting the neighborhood, but which is more important? And we're going to set our priorities, not just on the data, but also how we value some of those objectives. We think some things are more important than others. We want the data so we get it right, but we also want to have a reality check with our community. What are your values? You know, what should drive the decision?
Definitely. Thank you. All right. You spoke on inventory just now. How do you use data to inventory and what you have and determine whether it's improving or becoming degrading?
Vicki, why don't you take it?
Yeah, I think this is a really critical and important part. In the Tribal 128 programs, we have an opportunity to collect data through a survey and inventory, right? And people typically think, okay, where's the gas station? Where's the dry cleaner? Where's the open dump? But my approach is a little bit different. I like to establish the baseline. What was here before we did anything? Identify what was there before, establish that baseline. That way you can gauge how it's been degraded, right? What's the level of degradation? And that's important. I think, collecting that baseline data, what birds, bunnies, and trees were there first, prior to any type of thing. Did we used to have a salamander here and now there's not a salamander? Is the wood turtle coming back or is it going away? We used to have this kind of fish here. Even the small micro invertebrates that are in the water, that's the beginning of the food chain. If one isn't there, then the next one's not going to be there. And so then that affects the quality of life. It speaks to what the quality of the environment is, right? And going back to what we said in the very beginning, water people do water, dirt people do dirt, right? And one of the things that I brought into the program that I'm involved with was, if we're having a water quality issue, what's on the land that's contributing to that? What's the beginning problem here? It's not just about cleaning up the water, it's about what's running into the water. So, taking a whole watershed approach to what's happening, and to Cynthia's point, also, mercury comes from the air. It deposits in the water. It makes fish impossible to eat without getting sick. So, looking at that holistic approach, right? And one of the challenges that I've heard from tribes who have 128 programs is because it comes out of the CERCLA world, there's been some challenges sometimes allowing the tribal staff to take the training necessary to understand these interconnected issues, right? That's important. We need to continually create that inventory by looking, for lack of a better word, looking holistically at things. And with that, I'll shut up.
Well, one of the big things as far as a data inventory that the tribes are required to submit each year before they are given funding is a PALS worksheet, and it stands for Program Activity Levels. And it's an interesting way to measure the growth of your program and the impact that you're having as you look at the different areas that we are allowed to function in, and that's brownfields, underground storage tanks, solid waste, Superfund, hazardous materials. All these things have an acreage kind of component to them. And as we add up the total number of acres that we're trying to clean up or have cleaned up, we have a really nice number that we can share with our project officers, and they share that with the region, and they eventually share that with DC. And so they come up every year with brownfields throughout the country has cleaned up so many acres, and it makes it a really popular program, one of the few popular programs within EPA.
Beautiful. All right. Anything else, Eugene, Cynthia, you want to add to that?
So, right, relative to performance partnership grants, I'll throw a plug in there. That's a tool that EPA is encouraging grant recipients to use to kind of put all their grants that are eligible in one vehicle, right? And so what that allows is a lot of flexibility, and it starts breaking down those barriers. So, for instance, People might put in their Brownfield 128, their gap funding, their 106 to 319, their 105 air grant. That really helps to start to break down those barriers and open opportunities for cross-programmatic work that supports an entire tribal environmental department.
Well, that basically brings us to the end of today's episode. So wanted to take a moment and thank everyone and allow Cynthia to do a plug for technical assistance or any other needs that KSU TAB provides.
Okay, so here's the plug for KSU TAB. So the Kansas State University's Tribal Technical Assistance to Brownfield program that we call Tribal TAB is available to all U.S. tribal communities. We're a group of technical assistants, faculty, experts, people like Eugene who come out of the federal government with a great deal of experience, peer-to-peer between tribes. And we provide free technical assistance for environmental assessments, brownfields inventory, identifying funding, which we'll be talking about in the future, helping to plan for reuse. I do work with digital mapping and with database management, things of that sort. So it's all free. It's through a US EPA grant. So if you'd like to find out more, if you'd like our contact information, go to ksutab.org/tribal. That's ksutab.org/tribal. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you for that, Cynthia and Victoria and Eugene and Mark. Having y'all has been a pleasure today. All right, so with that, it brings us to the end of the episode. Again, thank y'all for tuning in and listening, joining us. We hope you enjoyed today's episode, and as always, let us know how we're doing. Give us a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, so on and so forth. And visit us at www.nativelearningcenter.com to find information on upcoming webinars and virtual trainings. And be sure to come back for more content. So until next time, see you later. And we hope you all have a wonderful day, evening, weekend, whatever or whenever you're listening to this. So for now, bye.